There is a moment most men won't admit to. It doesn't happen when you fail. It doesn't happen when you lose your job. It doesn't happen during a breakup. It happens on an ordinary night. Nothing is wrong, and yet something feels misaligned. You scroll without seeing. You check notifications that don't matter. You open an app, close it, open another, close it. You tell yourself you're tired, but it isn't exhaustion. It's a quiet question you don't want to form. Why does this feel so small? You did what they told you. You stayed disciplined. You avoided disaster. You built credit. You got the degree. You learned how to speak in professional. You optimized yourself. You became efficient. And somewhere along the way, you became contained, not oppressed, contained, like a powerful animal in a controlled environment, fed on schedule, stimulated on schedule, exercised on schedule, entertained on demand. Your risks are calculated, your rebellion is curated, your outrage is monetized. Even your escape is subscription-based. And here's the strange part, you're not struggling. That's what makes it difficult to articulate. You're functioning, but functioning is not the same as living. There was a time when survival demanded something physical from you. Your grandfather understood it. His father definitely did. You woke up because something needed to be done, not because an alarm vibrated. You worked it because food, shelter, or reputation depended on it, not because your calendar said quarterly review. There was friction, and friction gave shape. Today, friction has been engineered away. Food arrives, water flows, heat responds to a dial, money moves invisibly. You do not feel the system, but the system feels you. Every purchase tracked, every click recorded, every preference learned, not maliciously, mechanically, and you are told this is progress. Maybe it is, but progress has side effects. When life becomes seamless, you become softer in ways you can't see. Not weaker physically, softer psychologically. You tolerate less uncertainty. You avoid discomfort faster. You require stimulation to feel engaged. And when stimulation stops, the emptiness hums. That's the moment on the couch. That's the 11:47 p.m. ceiling stare. You're not depressed. You're under-challenged, under-claimed, under-needed. You were built for responsibility that felt real. Instead, you manage emails. You were built for risk that required courage. Instead, you optimize portfolios. You were built for tribe. Instead, you scroll past strangers. No one forced this on you. That's what makes it uncomfortable. You opted in. You pursued stability. You chose predictability. You chose the path with the least immediate pain. And now you feel the long-term cost. This is not a call to abandon society. It's a call to notice what society quietly reshaped. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, men were stripped of illusion brutally. Jobs vanished. Savings evaporated. Stability was exposed as temporary. That era produced hardness, sometimes too much of it. Today, illusion is not ripped away. It is cushioned. Inflation rises slowly. Debt expands gradually. Dependency normalizes gently. You are never forced to confront fragility directly. You just feel anxious without knowing why. Because your life depends on systems you do not control. Your job depends on markets. Your markets depend on policy. Your policy depends on institutions. Your savings depend on interest rates. And interest rates depend on decisions made inside buildings you will never enter. Again, this is not conspiracy. It's structure. But structure matters. Because if your sense of safety depends entirely on structures outside you, then your internal life shrinks. You start protecting position instead of building power. You avoid risk instead of cultivating strength. You chase comfort instead of character. And comfort becomes your quiet captor. The system does not need to imprison you. It only needs to keep you comfortable enough not to leave. You don't escape. You subscribe. And you don't escape. You subscribe. And beneath it all, something in you knows. You were not designed for this level of predictability. You were designed for meaningful strain, not chaos, strain. The kind that demands growth, the kind that clarifies identity, the kind that forces you to rely on your own capability. But capability atrophies when unused. If you never have to fix anything, you forget you can. If you never have to endure silence, you forget you're able. If you never face real stakes, you forget what courage feels like. So the anxiety builds without visible cause, because your nervous system is wired for engagement, and instead it receives maintenance. You are maintained, serviced, entertained, updated, but rarely tested. And a man who is never tested begins to doubt himself, not consciously, subtly. He wonders why he feels restless, why small inconveniences irritate him, why he needs constant input, why silence feels heavy. It's because the modern environment removes initiation. There is no rite of passage, no threshold crossed, no clear moment where you prove something to yourself. You simply age, you accumulate responsibilities, you gather subscriptions, you expand lifestyle. But expansion is not evolution. Sometimes it's just inflation, more square footage, more software, more upgrades. But are you more capable, more resilient, more sovereign, or just more dependent on things working smoothly? That is the quiet fear. Not that the system will collapse, but that if it did, you wouldn't recognize yourself in the mirror. You don't want catastrophe. You want competence. You don't want chaos. You want solidity. And solidity does not come from seamless living. It comes from voluntary friction, from choosing difficulty when comfort is available, from building strength before you are forced to, from reclaiming responsibility in areas you outsourced. Cooking instead of ordering, fixing instead of replacing, reading instead of scrolling, saving instead of financing, silence instead of noise. Not because the system is evil, but because you need edges, you need resistance, you need proof to yourself that you are not merely a consumer of stability, but a creator of it. And here's the hopeful part. The cage is not locked, it is padded, which means the exit is not dramatic, it is deliberate. You don't need to burn anything down. You need to reclaim parts of yourself that comfort dulled. Strength is still available, clarity is still available, depth is still available, but they require you to step slightly outside the choreography, to endure boredom without medicating it, to reduce dependency without announcing it, to build capability quietly. The system can price assets, it can inflate currencies, it can regulate industries, but it cannot inflate your character. It cannot print discipline. It cannot subsidize self-respect. That remains yours. And the moment you begin strengthening that, even slightly, something changes. The anxiety softens. The ceiling feels less heavy. The room feels larger. Because you are no longer just living inside a structure. You are rebuilding yourself inside it. And that's where real freedom begins. There is a moment most men won't admit to. It doesn't happen when you fail. It doesn't happen when you lose your job. It doesn't happen during a breakup. It happens on an ordinary night. Nothing is wrong. And yet something feels misaligned. You scroll without seeing. You check notifications that don't matter. You open an app, close it, open another, close it. You tell yourself you're tired. But it isn't exhaustion. It's a quiet question you don't want to form. Why does this feel so small? You did what they told you. You stayed disciplined. You avoided disaster. You built credit. You got the degree. You learned how to speak in professional. You optimized yourself. You became efficient. And somewhere along, comfort demands justification. When your life is difficult, you don't question meaning. Meaning is survival. But when your life is stable, when nothing is actively wrong, you are forced into a different confrontation. If I'm not fighting for survival, what am I fighting for? And that question is dangerous, because the modern world offers you substitutes, status instead of significance, income instead of identity, visibility instead of virtue, productivity instead of purpose. You are told that upward movement is the goal, promotion, upgrade, expansion, leverage, always more. But more of what? More responsibility or more dependency, more income or more overhead, more visibility or more pressure? Look closely at the modern version of success. It usually includes a mortgage, car payments, subscriptions, insurance, retirement accounts, professional reputation, digital presence. Each of those is reasonable.
Individually, but together, they form something subtle. Obligation density. You wake up owing the bank, owing your employer, owing your image, owing your past decisions. You are not starving, but you are leveraged. And leverage changes psychology. When you owe little, you negotiate differently. When you need little, you speak differently. When your lifestyle is light, you move differently. But when your structure is heavy, your behavior adjusts. You become cautious. Not wise, cautious. You avoid confrontation at work because you cannot afford instability. You avoid risk because your burn rate is high. You avoid change because your overhead is fixed. And slowly, without realizing it, your personality reshapes itself around maintaining the machine. You start defending a life you didn't consciously design. That's the part no one talks about. Most men didn't design their lives. They assembled them, piece by piece, following templates: college, career, apartment, upgrade, relationship, mortgage, refinance, repeat. At no point did someone stop and ask, does this structure make me stronger, or does it just make me busier? There's nothing wrong with stability. The problem is unconscious stability, stability that costs you autonomy, stability that replaces capability, stability that makes you afraid to lose what you once didn't need. And fear is subtle. You don't say, I'm afraid. You say, it's not the right time. I'll wait until things settle. I can't take that risk. Maybe next year. Next year becomes a habit, and habits become identity. Eventually, you forget you were once capable of radical change. You forget that you once moved cities, took chances, started things without guarantees. Now you optimize instead of initiate. You compare instead of create. You scroll instead of build. Not because you're weak, because your structure punishes volatility. This is where resentment begins. Not loud resentment, quiet resentment, at work, at bills, at expectations, at the invisible contract you signed it with adulthood. You start feeling like life is maintenance. Wake up, work, pay, recover, repeat. And the tragedy isn't that it's unbearable. It's that it's manageable. Manageable dissatisfaction is more dangerous than crisis. Crisis forces reevaluation. Manageable dissatisfaction becomes permanent background noise. And over time, background noise becomes personality. You become more irritable, more tired, more distracted. You need constant stimulation because silence reveals the truth. The truth that you traded intensity for insulation. You traded uncertainty for predictability. You traded wildness for warranties. Again, this is not a call to abandon responsibility. Responsibility is strength. But there is a difference between chosen responsibility and inherited burden. Chosen responsibility expands you. Inherited burden compresses you. When you choose to support a family, that builds gravity. When you choose to build something meaningful, that builds direction. But when you inherit layers of obligation simply because that's what adults do, something else happens. You become a custodian of expectations, and the most dangerous expectation is this: that comfort equals success. Comfort is neutral. It can be earned. It can be rented. It can be financed. But comfort does not measure depth. A man can live in climate control and still feel internally unstable. Because internal stability does not come from smooth surfaces. It comes from tested edges. Ask yourself honestly, when was the last time you did something difficult that no one would applaud? Not for content, not for image, not for income, just to prove to yourself that you still could? When was the last time you endured boredom intentionally? When was the last time you reduced something instead of upgrading it? When was the last time you said no to expansion? These questions are uncomfortable because they reveal something. You are capable of more than the system requires of you. And that gap between capability and requirement is where frustration lives. Modern life does not require your full strength. It requires your compliance, your participation, your consumption, your specialization. It does not require your resilience. In fact, extreme resilience is inconvenient. A man who needs very little is hard to pressure. A man with low overhead is hard to control. A man without addiction is hard to manipulate. A man who can walk away is unpredictable. And unpredictability destabilizes structures built on predictability. So the system rewards optimization inside the cage, not exit from it. You get praised for maximizing within constraints, rarely for questioning them. But here's the hopeful truth. You don't need to escape the system to reclaim yourself. You need to reduce your psychological dependence on it. That begins with one shift, from expansion to consolidation. Instead of asking, how do I grow faster? Ask, what can I remove? Instead of asking, how do I earn more? Ask, how little do I actually need? Instead of asking, how do I look more successful? Ask, where am I fragile? Fragility hides in excess spending, excess stimulation, excess identity tied to external approval. The more complex your life becomes, the more points of failure it contains. The simpler it becomes, the more stable you feel. Not bored, stable. There is dignity in reduction. There is power in needing less. There is clarity in owning fewer moving parts. And when you reduce voluntarily, something strange happens. Your fear decreases, because dependency decreases. Your posture changes, because your survival no longer feels outsourced. You speak more directly, because you are less leveraged. You think more clearly, because noise has been cut. And the anxiety that once hovered at night begins to dissolve. Not because the world stabilized, but because you did. The system still moves, markets fluctuate, policies shift, technology evolves, but your internal structure becomes less reactive. You are no longer bracing for disruption, you are prepared for it. That difference is everything. And once you taste that stability, not the external kind, but the internal kind, you realize something powerful. You were never meant to live anesthetized. You were meant to live awake, not frantic, not paranoid, awake.
There's a difference between escape and awakening. Escape is emotional. Awakening is deliberate. Most men fantasize about escape, quitting the job, leaving the city, starting over somewhere remote, burning everything down and rebuilding. But fantasies are usually a symptom, not a solution. The problem isn't your location. It isn't your square footage. It isn't even the system itself. The problem is internal authority. Somewhere along the way, you outsourced it. You outsourced your sense of progress to promotions, your sense of worth to income, your sense of belonging to digital approval, your sense of safety to institutions. And when authority is outsourced, anxiety fills the gap. Because everything external moves, markets shift, companies restructure, policies change, algorithms update. If your identity depends on moving pieces, you will always feel slightly braced. Not panicked, just braced. And bracing becomes posture. You begin living defensively, defending lifestyle, defending image, defending position. But defense is not strength. Defense is maintenance. Strength is something else entirely. Strength is the ability to endure change without losing yourself. Strength is knowing that if your comfort shrank tomorrow, you would still recognize the man in the mirror. That recognition, that sovereignty, not political power, not financial dominance, internal sovereignty. It begins with voluntary hardship, not extreme hardship, not theatrics, small, chosen friction, doing the inconvenient thing when convenience is available. Keeping cash reserves not because collapse is imminent, but because independence feels different when you do. Staying physically capable not for aesthetics, but because physical strength anchors psychological stability. Spending below your means not out of fear, but because lightness is power. Sitting in silence without reaching for stimulation. Learning skills that make you useful beyond your job description. These actions don't trend. They don't get applause. But they restore something ancient, self-trust. When you choose difficulty and endure it, you begin trusting yourself again. That trust dissolves quiet anxiety, because anxiety whispers one question. If something goes wrong, can you handle it? Most modern men aren't sure, not because they're incapable, because they haven't tested themselves recently. The system removed most mandatory tests. So you must reintroduce them voluntarily, not to suffer, to remember that you are more than your subscriptions, more than your login credentials, more than your salary band, more than your curated image. You are capacity, capacity to endure, capacity to adapt, capacity to lead yourself. When that capacity is exercised, something shifts. The world doesn't become less chaotic, but it becomes less intimidating. You stop chasing endless upgrades. You start valuing stability of character. You stop needing constant validation. You start respecting quiet competence. You stop fearing being overlooked. You start valuing being underestimated. Underestimated men move freely. They are not trapped by their own image. There is dignity in being unremarkable on the surface and unshakable underneath. That's the opposite of the gilded cage. The cage shines externally, but weakens you internally. Sovereignty looks plain externally, but strengthens you internally. And here's the part that changes everything. You don't need the system to fail in order to reclaim yourself. You don't need collapse. You don't need crisis. You don't need drama. You need clarity. Clarity about what is actually yours. Your discipline, your restraint, your health, your thinking, your standards, your ability to walk away. Everything else is conditional. Jobs are conditional. Markets are conditional. Currencies are conditional. Approval is conditional. But character compounds. Quietly. No institution can inflate it. No policy can subsidize it. No algorithm can manufacture it. It is built decision by decision, night by night, choice by choice. That 11:47 p.m. ceiling stare, it doesn't disappear because you upgraded your life. It disappears because you strengthened yourself, because you know, even if no one else does, that you are not merely a participant in a system. You are a man capable of standing without it. And when you know that, something subtle changes. You stop resenting comfort. You stop fearing instability. You stop chasing status. You start choosing deliberately. You participate in the system, but you are not consumed by it. You earn, but you are not owned. You build, but you are not dependent. You live, but you are not anesthetized. You were never meant to live padded on all sides. You were meant to feel edges, to carry weight, to build internal gravity. The test isn't coming from outside. It's the one you choose for yourself. Quietly, deliberately, without announcement. That's where dignity returns. That's where sovereignty begins. And that's where the cage dissolves. Not because someone opened it, but because you no longer require it to feel safe.